Today, we're going to be talking about vampires because I chose the subject and Emma's here to suffer. What do you know about vampires?
What kind of vampires?
Any kind of vampires. Vampires in general. What do you know about vampires?
Stab them with stakes. Take off their head, that works really good. Silver?
So right now,
You can poison them with dead man's blood, apparently.
you are specifically thinking about murdering vampires, and all I asked was, what do you know about vampires? And your first reach was how to kill them.
Yeah, well...
Eat it, Twilight.
Fair enough, because today we're going to be talking about... Oh no, that actually makes me sound more radical. That's fine. Today we're going to be talking about how all vampires are capitalists. Getting into the wine-explaining of vampires.
Is it wine-splaining?
Wine-splaining.
Wine-splaining.
The wine-splaining of vampires. Vampires as a concept grew out of folk superstitions about the dead coming back to life in general, because there was a lot of misunderstanding as to why, post-death, corpses would appear to seem flushed, for example, as if they'd been sucking some blood. They would have longer hair, longer nails, that kind of thing. So the original fear of vampires specifically came out of a fear of the undead, which is a little bit more ubiquitous and more tied to fear of disease, for example, fear of death in general, which is a little...
Fast-breaking developments in the coronavirus emergency in the U.S. and around the world.
A window to flatten the curve of the epidemic is narrow.
It's 2020, the plague is back, and we are vibing. Disease has a wasting effect on human beings that looks like someone is actively trying to draw life and blood out of you. And so that's where it kind of became a conflation from fear of the undead to fear that the undead are coming back and feeding on the living.
Yikes.
Yikes. And this is where we get into someone being like, hey, cite your sources. I'm gonna look at you and go, no. When we're looking at the prototypical vampire, we're looking at figures like Dracula.
This is the story of Dracula.
You know, but you also have figures like... Okay, the reason why I pause is because I am either going to mention a famous historical vampire or a currently living Duchess of England. Carmilla or Camilla? One of them is a vampire!
Carmel?
I think Carmilla is the vampire, but also, given the angle of this chat, long story short, people have been having thoughts about the aristocracy as bloodsuckers for a very long time, and that is where we get to capitalism.
I was gonna say, and where do we come to capitalism here?
Well, here's where we come to capitalism, where we get to the intersection of vampires and capitalism is guess who shows up in the late 1800s with a hot take? Foundational schools of knowledge.
I didn't take those classes.
Karl Marx shows up.
Oh!
Karl Marx shows up. Karl Marx shows up and Karl Marx goes, hey, capitalists are vampires. Legit, he had actually like a whole oh boy, that's not YouTube friendly. He had a whole take about how capitalists are vampires and vice versa. Vampires are actually capitalists. The reason why he said that capitalists are vampires is because capitalists subsist off of the life force of laborers. So
Sounds legit.
and again, we can delve into that theory, but that's not what I'm here for. The problem with capitalism is that capitalism is a never-ending spiral where you have to accumulate money to make money, to accumulate more money. To what end, one might ask? And this was the formula that Marx put forward. Money for capital for money plus. But then in here, if you get into like labor theory, this is where you get people, because capital is money that you use to make more money. There we go. And there are a bunch of different aspects of what would count as like property that you would use to make more money. But the only one that matters in a Marxist reading is labor. And the difference with labor, why is labor different from having the means of production, financial capital, land, literally anything else? What's different about labor?
I didn't take that class.
Labor is people,
Oh.
exactly. Just like Soylent Green, and that is why capitalists are vampires. No, I am here for it, but we don't have time for it. The most important thing is how has media reacted to this idea of capitalists are vampires, vampires are capitalists, / vice versa, in terms of how do we portray the vampire in pop culture and how does it reflect our view of, and capitalist is almost too narrow a view because capitalism as it exists is slightly newer than the vampire as it exists. But we have always sort of had in the back of our mind this idea of a parasitic class that draws life force from the average working Joe. And that's where we get back to Dracula, because Dracula is a reflection of late 1800s, early 1900s aristocracy. Mostly because aristocracy in Europe is complicated. So if you are a person in the 1800s, you might think of the ruling class as being a distant and mildly ancient crumbling power who lives in these mansions that you have never seen and have no access to, like Dracula. Dracula would have been a reflection of the upper class at that point. So if we can accept old money capitalists as Dracula, and we can accept Marx being like, hey, if we're looking at pop culture, anytime we're talking about vampires, it is the members of the proletariat trying to express their angst about the upper class through metaphor, because that is the safest way to do so. If we can accept all these things and accept that we can basically see capitalists, higher class folks who subsist off of the life work of the laborers as the mosquitoes of humanity. If we can accept all this, then your next question. Your next question is gonna be, what happened in the late 20th century, early 21st century, because vampires suddenly became sexy? That's definitely what you were gonna be like.
Oh yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking.
You were thinking,
yeah, I was
when,
like, oh, right.
When did the
Yes.
vampires become sexy?
Yeah, that was the first
That's
thing
the
on my
first.
mind.
So,
when did vampires become sexy?
I don't know if you can tell by the clothing, but I was the one who went through a Twilight phase. But both of us went through a Moonlight phase, so what does that say about us?
Whatever you've heard about vampires, you don't know the whole story.
What it says is neoliberalism. Yes, because
That's when I put the banner up. It says
neoliberalism. Because at some point in the mid to late 20th century, we get to a point where wealth is no longer, and this is like, okay, no, we gotta go back. Okay, so in terms
Wait,
of,
we're going back again?
yeah, we're going back.
Yeah, okay, we were going forward, but now we're going back.
No.
The point is, we were talking about history, and then we got to the early 20th century, and then we went back.
Well, actually no, because you're right. So in the late 1800s, the appealing thing about capitalism for a lot of people was that power was shifted from some sort of God-given aristocracy over to who has earned it. Which is why capitalism in general can have a appealing quality, because you get it into your head that anyone can earn enough capital to matter as a human being in the global discourse, which was sort of the thing at the time. And now. Basically, it's the classic argument of old money versus new money. So if that is the shift in the late 1800s, early 1900s, obviously that's going to cause a pop culture shift that comes a little bit after that, where we start to see the clash of old money vampires versus new money vampires. And we see this in shows like Buffy, for example, where Angel is essentially a trust fund kid who has run off from his rich but morally ambiguous family. So he's trying to fight the good fight, but also can't stop hitting on blonde high school girls. So even if we look at Twilight, which is a fairly modern example, this is where you see the rise of the ethical vampire, the ethical capitalist, but also sort of the vampire as a, you know, capital bad boy. If we're talking like Wolf of Wall Street, Leonardo DiCaprio, like, God, you hate him because he did so much embezzlement, but he's so fun and he's so rich and like, you just want to live that vampire. Vampire. In fact, the most popular bad boy capitalist of the 2010s was literally based on a goddamn vampire. And yes, we are talking about 50 Shades of Grey, unfortunately, because Christian Grey is a wealthy young investment banker. I think he does something business-wise, but also no one cares. It's more about the wealth and what he has. And was fan fiction of Edward Cullen. If you look at the Cullens in Twilight, a lot of the appeal when you read the book is that Bella goes to this house where they have everything. They've got this like beautiful glass open concept mansion with the like giant piano, you know, and
You would focus on the piano.
Look, I'm not saying that.
I wanna know what love is.
So, modern day vampire capitalists, they be rich. And also, I think it is worthy to move slightly out of my lane for a second to talk about the fetishized paleness of vampires too, where vampires are generally categorized as glisteningly white. And it
Or
becomes
sparklingly
white. And this harkens way, way, way back to the original vampire myths, and it would come from multiple places. Even before whiteness as a identity was codified in the late 1900s as a contrast against people of color. And don't get me wrong, like European imperialism was already well enforced. It's a whole thing, yikes. But even before then, pale skin was seen as a marker of the aristocracy because that means you're not going out in the fields and working. So it would make sense that your aristocrat vampires. Your aristocrat.
Just remember the Aristocats.
No, that will screw me up even more. That will screw me up worse.
You're welcome.
I thought they were called Aristocats for a million years, and I forgot the R for a million years but I never forgot my arpeggios. We're talking about racism! Okay, so we should comment on that though, because what you end up getting that I think is interesting in literature in the 20th century and 21st century is either you have people who fully acknowledge that whiteness has an impact in terms of the parasitic capitalist aristocracy as Marx would define it, or you wind up kind of telling on yourself in terms of fetishizing like, yeah, this like rich guy who's like super white. Like so pale,
great.
so pale, so sparklingly white. And maybe that's sort of a thing we can kind of look at and examine. So capitalism. So we enter a phase in the 21st century where we get to the bad boy capitalists where like, man, you don't want to be into Christian Grey. I stand nowhere. Where I stand is that I'm very gay, so I don't have a stake in this argument. I don't have a stake.
You don't have a stake.
I've got a point. Late 1900s, early 21st century, we get to a point where we're like, vampires are the capitalist trust fund baby bad boys who have broken away. If they're the good vampires, they're the ones who usually
Drink with tradition.
turn to private detection of all things.
Angel Investigations, we help the hopeless.
I want to help people. That's why I became a PI.
But here's where we get something interesting, is that as we sort of died down in the vampire craze and the craze of the, like, you know, the hot leather jacket vampire, because like you see spin-offs of vampires who do not fall into the capitalist iconography. But usually those are sort of subversions of the vampire trope as it exists on its own. What do you do when you reach the pop culture moment of singularity where, because we have such a proliferation of media, we have said, and I'm not saying this definitively, but to a marketing standpoint, everything that could possibly be said about vampires, because Twilight hit a huge craze, so we had the riding the Twilight wave, we had vampire book upon trying to deconstruct the vampire
Academy,
genre.
Vampire Diaries.
Yeah. Where they're like, we're gonna do something.
True Blood.
True Blood is definitely one of those, and even then there was a contrast between the aristocratic kind of vampires, even though they were like true Southerners. And I think it is actually interesting, if you want to go on a deep dive on this topic, a good paper that you could write for your undergrad, if you were looking for one, is comparing and contrasting in Twilight the Voltari against the North American new money vampires, who are the ethical vampires and not the old money vampires who have lived for 500, 600 years and are part of the old aristocratic system that perhaps the Americans might have rebelled against at some point and cut their ties with. It's almost like a metaphor. But when you have gotten to a point where you have made a like meet cute web series about Carmilla.
Who the hell are you?
Carmilla. But we know she's a vampire. I mean, we've known that since the blood in the milk container, right? Vampire, vampire, vampire.
What do you do with vampires so that you can still, after deconstructing them, comment about how vampires and capitalists go hand in hand in terms of parasitic natures? Where'd you go?
I think you're gonna tell us.
I will. Where you go? Obviously science fiction, because you gotta look to the future.
Yes.
And that's where you get into the vampires who will not say that they are vampires, but they are essentially vampires, and that's where we get to this is for you. Plot twist, Jupiter ascending.
Your planet was seeded by brass axe industries roughly 100,000 years ago.
Jupiter ascending, and this is going to be spoilers if you've never seen the movie. Even if you've never seen the movie and you watch the rest of this, please see the movie, because at the very least, it is one of the most joyful 2.5 hours. How long is it?
I don't know.
I know it's longer than it should be, but also I love every moment of it, so for me it's not long enough. 2 hours and 7 minutes. It's going to be the best 2 hours and 7 minutes of your life.
There are bees. And there's a queen of the bees.
Yeah, the queen of the bees is not necessarily a bee, but neither is Chief Bee Sean Bean. I can hear my D&D crew yelling at me right now. We get to the sci-fi vampires where they don't say that they're vampires, but this is the upper class of the galaxy, and the reason why they are able to live longer and better lives than everyone else is because they actively farm the life force of people on specific planets.
Have you ever seen a harvest?
Never. But I've heard they feel no pain.
To a point where, because it's almost like the Wachowski siblings sat down and read Karl Marx and had opinions about it in The Matrix that no one picked up on, and so they were like, well, we gotta get more obvious about it. So at one point, one of these aristocratic characters has like a very, especially if you have taken even like first year ethics, first year anything in university, first year what is like, well, life is really a pyramid where you have the people on top who feed off the people on the bottom, and that's just how it is.
Life is an act of consumption. To live is to consume. Now the human beings on your planet are merely a resource waiting to be converted into capital. This entire enterprise designed to a single purpose: to create profit. Every human society is a pyramid, and that some lives will always matter more than others.
And their whole thing is that they're able to live as long as they do because they specifically farm and feed off of what the labors of the proletariat almost.
Ooh.
So they are vampires.
The labors, you say?
The labors.
The labors.
The labors. When we look at vampires and how they feed off of blood, when we were understanding vampires. When we were understanding vampires as a
Vampires.
the vampires, when we were understanding with a Y, yes. And see, now we've circled back to me being correct. When we understood them as capitalists, blood makes sense as a metaphor because we would more easily see that as the most direct expression of our life force on this earth. But now that we are moving forward, and one, we have codified the vampire as having a certain aesthetic that needs to be deconstructed for it to be fresh. We need to expand our view of what the life force counts as. So Jupiter ascending, life force is actually very on the nose in terms of life force. It goes back to the Matrix where it's like we literally turn people into batteries, which robots, but vampires. Then when you get to things like In Time and others, we are feeding off time. Essentially, whatever it is that we equate as being fundamentally something that only humanity can provide. Anytime that we view that as something that other people are extrapolating from other human beings to their detriment or hoarding without any kind of a shared or collective system, we got ourselves vampires. And therefore, I would posit vampires are capitalists, capitalists are vampires, and Miss Monopoly is a vampire queen. This is not a new theory. If you want to see the borrowed observations, obviously go check out Marx. A whole bunch of people obviously have expanded on this topic, probably better than I have, because the whole point of this is if you feel like you are sitting in a pub and you happen to be overhearing the wild ravings of the people in the booth next to yours, then we have done our job. That is why we're here. If you appreciated these ramblings, please let us know in the comments below. Give us a like, thumbs up. Emma will link our social media stuff in the thing. We will.
Thingy.
You can find us there. Let us know if there's anything you want us to have an opinion about. We do have more wine takes.
Send us thoughts. Send us ideas.
We love thoughts.
We're here, and the pandemic is here, so
we're here.
We'll still be here for as long as that's happening.
You're here. Join us with wine. So next time we will be talking about Emma's everlasting and undying love of Cats the musical, specifically the 2019 Tom Hooper beautiful reimagining, and how it has enlightened and changed Emma's life, and also the lives of Craig and Bonnie, who specifically requested that I put my mildly tipsy / drunken rambles about vampires being capitalists and vice versa into a video. This is for you guys, you cat lovers, you cats, Andrew Lloyd Webber lovers.
If Bex makes me do a video about cats, you will not be hearing from Bex ever again.
Next time, bye! It's my guilty pleasure.
You know, technically, we We don't have to say it's a guilty pleasure. Just enjoy the things you like. There doesn't need to be any
things
guilt about it. Just if
you
you
like.
enjoy it, then great.
You can have so many feelings all at once.